Hello friends, I've got a bad case of bronchitis or a bad cold. I'll try to speak in a way that you can understand me. The good news is I'm going to the doctor tomorrow and I'm hoping to get a Z-Pack. That'll solve all of my problems. Anyway, today we're continuing our discussion of the sixth sign in John's Gospel, and that would be the healing of the man born blind. You'll remember that Jesus found him, placed a mud paste on his eyes, and then told him to go to the pool of Siloam and wash off. And when he followed Jesus' instructions, he came back seeing. Today, I want to talk about the developing faith of this formerly blind man. I want to talk about the trajectory of his faith, the timeline of his faith. Would that be all right with you? We'll pick up this trajectory with the formerly blind man explaining to his neighbors and others what had happened. In verse 11 he said, "The man, Jesus, made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' Then I went and I washed, and I received my sight." Now, is it fair to say that he probably didn't know that much about Jesus? I don't know how much he knew about him. I'm sure it would take a little bit of faith for him to do as Jesus instructed. But let's try to come to some kind of understanding as to why he did what Jesus told him to do. Did he have some basic knowledge of who Jesus was? Did he have just enough trust in Jesus to follow those simple instructions? Or did he feel, hey, I've got to get this mud off my eyes? I'm sure he didn't expect a miracle to occur. I doubt that very much. Or had he heard of Jesus' reputation? Did he think to himself, I've heard about him, perhaps he can help me? Well, I doubt that too, to be honest with you. I doubt that he had any expectation that he would receive his sight. Or was he encouraged by the promise of Jesus? Did he know just a little bit about Jesus? And when he heard the promise, or he thought about the promise that he might receive his sight, perhaps he had a need that made him desperate enough to put that simple faith, that simple trust in Jesus. Whatever his rationale for doing what Jesus told him to do, the key here is that he followed Jesus' instructions, and he was rewarded for it. Now, after the formerly blind man is healed and receives his sight, he is allowed the time to process what has happened and to find the meaning in it. The religious leaders come to him and ask him, "How did you receive your sight?" And the man replies with just the facts. "He put mud on my eyes, then I washed, and now I see." Verse 15, just the facts. And then they ask, well, who is this Jesus? That's what they really want to know. Who is Jesus and where does he come from? The Pharisees say that he cannot have come from God because he didn't observe the Sabbath. Verse 16. And so they turn to the man and they say, "What do you say about him? It was your eyes he opened." Again, not even the opponents of Jesus are denying that a miracle occurred. They're just trying to determine where Jesus came from. And the formerly blind man replies that Jesus is a prophet. So you see, his faith in Jesus is growing as he's allowed to process his experience. First he calls Jesus the man, and now for him, he's the prophet. Well, that makes sense. Now, eventually in our story, the religious leaders cast this man out of the synagogue because they had determined that anyone who confessed faith in Jesus would be cast out of that synagogue. Now, that would be an important loss to this man. And don't you know, Jesus finds this man. Jesus is always in search of those who are hurting and those who are ostracized, isn't he? Jesus finds this man and gives his faith a chance to grow by giving him the opportunity to articulate his faith. And so, Jesus finds him and says to him, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" And the man answers, "Who is he?" And Jesus replies, "You have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he." And the formerly blind man responded, "Lord, I believe." And the record tells us that he worshiped him. So this man's faith has grown. In the beginning, he calls Jesus the man, and then the prophet. and now Lord. And he falls on his knees and begins to worship this one who brought back his sight. Now, please stay with me for just a minute or two longer. I want us to consider a possible application of this man's story. And I want you to ask yourself, where are you in this trajectory of faith? Perhaps you've heard about Jesus. I imagine you have. And you've heard about some of the things that he has to offer. And perhaps you're curious. Your interest has been piqued. Perhaps enough that you would give him a listen? I would hope so. Perhaps you've heard more about what a relationship with Jesus can do for a person. Maybe you've heard that from a friend or a family member. And now you are more than interested. You're willing to give your faith in that friend or that family member a chance to develop and blossom into something rewarding for you. Or perhaps, like that blind man, you have some glaring need. And perhaps you've heard that some of the promises of Jesus can remedy your need. Do you have enough faith in Jesus to give him a listen and to do as he instructs? I want to see you give your faith in Jesus and your faith in God a chance to grow, just as it was with this blind man in John chapter 9. In our next blog, we'll talk about the formerly blind man's second encounter with the religious leaders of his day. We're going to compare his faith with theirs. I hope you'll join me then.